We all know that some stories about the ancient past seem too grand to be true, like a man raising the dead after 4 days, when even one day of silence is too much. But have you ever wondered what it truly felt like to stand right there, between the dust and the divinity? Tonight, we journey back to explore what it was like to visit the tomb of Lazarus. In today's video, we'll talk about the physical journey, the sights, and the sounds of that unforgettable day. So let's not waste any time, and let's begin. You find yourself on the road, leaving behind the immense, noisy shadow of Jerusalem. The path you walk becoming quickly less paved and more simply worn. This is the ancient way, a winding trail that skirts the dry, rocky contours of the Judean wilderness, heading gently eastward toward the village of Bethany. Your sandals, sturdy as they are, find little comfort in the terrain, immediately gathering a fine, pale ochre dust that puffs up with every step and coats your ankles in a gritty film. The sun, having long ascended to its zenith, hangs in the vast, bright sky like a relentless furnace, pressing down on the back of your neck with palpable heat. There is no escape from its scrutiny, and the air itself feels stripped of moisture, thin and intensely dry against your throat. This road is not meant for speed or commerce. It is a path of necessity, of pilgrimage, and now of quiet, shared sorrow. You pass no great chariots, only the occasional donkey laden with woven baskets, or a solitary figure moving with the slow, patient rhythm of rural life. Each step is a lesson in resilience, demanding effort from muscles unaccustomed to this terrain. You find your eyes tracing the path ahead, hoping for any shift in the landscape that might promise rest or shade. The few olive trees that cling to the harsh slopes offer only patchy, insufficient shade, their leaves silvery green against the parched browns and reds of the earth. The only constant sound is the hypnotic, steady thump shuffle of your own feet, a metronome marking the distance. Occasionally, a brittle, dry thorn bush, starved for water, scrapes against your outer robe with a whispering snick that startles you from your deep focus. You pull the rough, woven linen closer around your shoulders, appreciating the light color that seems to deflect the sun's fiercest intensity. Your senses are forced to adjust to the extremes of the environment, the blinding light above and the relentless grit underfoot. This dust, you realize, is not mere dirt. It is the pulverized history of countless forgotten journeys, rising briefly before settling once more. The silence here is profound, a characteristic of the open, unpopulated hills, broken only by the high, thin cry of a circling hawk. There is a weight to the stillness, a heavy atmosphere that seems appropriate for a journey toward a house of mourning. You find yourself conserving your breath, your voice unheard even by yourself. You reach for the water skin slung across your chest, its leather cool against your palm, and take a small, measured sip, allowing the warmth of the water to momentarily soothe your throat. It is a reminder that even in this sparse land, life finds a way, though often at a high cost. After what feels like an age of relentless exposure, the character of the terrain begins to shift subtly. The road, which had been steadily climbing, now levels out, and almost imperceptibly begins a gentle, welcome decline. The sight of this slight slope eases the tension in your knees and ankles, signaling that the high ridge has been conquered. Following this downward path, you notice that the scattered, scrubby growth is replaced by a few hardier fig and almond trees, suggesting a slightly richer water source hidden below. It is here that the relentless, direct press of the sun seems to yield, just for a moment, to a faint, cooling draft that moves up the valley. This small, precious breath of air is the first true indication that you are nearing the shelter of the hollow. The long journey is finally approaching its end, as the gentle slope of the road promises that the village of Bethany and the quiet stillness of its profound grief lies hidden just around the next bend. The gentle slope that promised the proximity of the village now stretches out beneath the punishing midday sun, revealing the true, arduous nature of this land. You continue your deliberate pace, allowing your body to settle into a rhythm dictated by exhaustion and the need for careful movement across the uneven ground. Each footfall remains a soft, rhythmic scuff against the gravel and loose earth, a sound so constant it almost disappears into the general hush of the heat. But listen closely, and you can perceive the unique texture of the sound, the slight grit beneath your heel, the whisper of dust escaping the pressure of your arch. It is a slow, steady, hypnotic sound, one that lulls the mind into a state of quiet focus. The air itself is the most dominating element here, a heavy, motionless presence that seems to absorb all moisture and energy. It is not merely hot, it possesses a unique mineral quality, smelling faintly of baked rock and dry, wild herbs that have withered in the relentless light. You breathe shallowly, feeling the dry air rasp against the back of your throat, reminding you of the body's fragile needs in this uncompromising landscape. The heat shimmer dances visibly above the distant rocks, distorting the shapes on the horizon, turning solid objects into liquid phantoms. This intense visual effect adds to the dreamlike, slightly disorienting atmosphere of the journey, making the destination feel both near and impossibly far. The silence is almost complete, a deep, pervasive quiet that holds the valley in its grip. This is not the silence of peace, but the quiet of waiting, a stillness where every living creature seeks the deepest shade. When the silence is broken, it is only by small, high-pitched sounds that seem almost inconsequential. A grasshopper, hidden somewhere in the dried stalks of summer growth, initiates a brief, insistent chirping, a mechanical, sawing sound that vibrates the air before cutting abruptly off. Moments later, from a distance that cannot be measured, comes the faint, plaintive cry of a shepherd, a high, elongated call that trails off into the shimmering heat. The sound speaks of solitude and vigilance, reinforcing the scale and emptiness of the hills that surround you. Your exhaustion is now a heavy cloak, woven of the long miles and the demanding heat. It settles first in your shoulders, making the simple weight of your robe feel burdensome, and then spreads to your legs, where the muscles protest with a dull, continuous ache. You find your thoughts slowing, becoming sluggish and indistinct, focusing only on the most immediate needs: shade, rest, and water. This physical heaviness mirrors the emotional weight of your purpose, You are moving toward a house struck by tragedy, and the difficult nature of the journey embodies the emotional burden of grief. Slow, inevitable, and requiring a profound, continuous effort. You reach for the leather water skin again, your hand moving with practiced, economical efficiency. The water, now warm from the long exposure, is still a vital comfort. You do not gulp it down. Instead, you allow a small amount to linger in your mouth, savoring the momentary coolness before swallowing. The act of drinking is a ritual, a small, conscious defiance of the sun's dominion, a necessary pause for the body to regroup. As you replace the stopper, you notice the rhythmic thump of your heart, a steady drum against the silence of the hills. Every internal sound, your breathing, your pulse, the slight gurgle in your stomach, becomes magnified in this intense stillness. The path continues its gentle winding, and you notice a change in the color palette of the earth. The purely red dust of the higher road gives way to a deeper, more settled brown, mixed with flecks of black soil, indicating richer ground. This visual shift provides a flicker of hope, suggesting the end of the wilderness and the beginning of settled cultivation. It is here, where the landscape softens slightly, that the absolute purity of the air is finally contaminated by human presence. It is only a faint impression at first, a ghost of a scent carried on a wisp of wind, but it is unmistakable. It is a complex, layered odor, the acrid, metallic hint of wood smoke. Not the smoke of a blazing fire, but the slow, smoldering heat of an enclosed hearth. Beneath that, there is the dry, comforting aroma of parched earth that has been dampened, perhaps by a well's overflow or a cistern's leak. It is the smell of human habitation, of industry and domesticity, an olfactory map pointing toward the small cluster of life hidden from view. You inhale deeply, allowing the mixture of cooking smoke and damp earth to ground you, pulling your focus away from the relentless, abstract heat of the open road. The scent is a promise of walls, of shade, of a pause in the endless walking. It is a subtle but powerful signal that the destination is now a tangible reality, not just an idea. You know that beyond the next curve, where a cluster of sun-bleached rocks forms a natural barrier, the quiet sorrow and temporary refuge of Bethany must lie waiting. You pick up your feet, the rhythmic scuff now imbued with a slight, renewed urgency, propelled forward by the gentle, smoky current of the wind. The silence of the hills has been broken by the quiet scent of life. As the road continues its downward arc toward the hidden valley, the landscape opens slightly, allowing the sound to travel more freely, giving life to the previously oppressive silence. Your concentration shifts entirely from the heat and the dust to the developing soundscape of the rural Judean hills. It begins with the clink, clank, clink of goat bells, not the uniform chime of church bells, but the irregular, metallic tapping of small, individual bells tied loosely around the necks of the herd leaders. The sound is melodic in its randomness, moving across the air as the invisible flock grazes far up on the opposing slope. This irregular rhythm acts as a subtle, natural form of music, a continuous, unobtrusive background score to the ancient routines of this land. Listen closer, and you can distinguish the faint, ethereal sound of a shepherd's pipe. It is a simple, reed instrument, not intended for performance in a hall, but for the solitary comfort of the herder and the guidance of the sheep. The notes are long, drawn out, and slightly melancholic, often wavering at the edges as the breath of the player gives out. The melody is meandering, unhurried, reflecting the deep, slow time of the hills. It is a comforting sound, linking you immediately to the countless generations who have lived, worked, and died under these same skies. A human breath interwoven with the dry rustle of the grasses. Beneath the bells and the pipe, there is the quiet, continuous murmur of the wind itself, a sound that rarely stops in this exposed valley. It is a low, continuous whooshing and hushing as it passes through the tall, dried-out stalks of the wild growth. This sound creates an auditory curtain, making the air feel dynamic and alive. A soft, ever-present voice. It is the sound of the world breathing, utterly indifferent to human worries, providing a profound sense of the eternal and the enduring against the backdrop of your fleeting human grief. Then, emerging from the depths of the valley, comes the quiet chatter of the shepherds calling their flocks. These are not loud, urgent shouts, but deep, guttural calls and long, familiar phrases that carry surprisingly far in the dry air. The language is local, the tone familiar and routine, establishing a sense of order and security in this remote place. You can almost visualize the rough-spun texture of their cloaks and the lean strength of their sun-tanned faces simply by the way they communicate with their animals. This human-to-animal communication is a fundamental sound of rural life, a gentle reminder that even in the shadow of grief, the world's necessary work continues. This entire collection of natural rhythmic sounds, the irregular bells, the wandering pipe, the sighing wind, stands in stark contrast to the purpose of your journey. The sounds are eternal, peaceful, and productive, yet you move toward a place defined by sudden absence and profound quiet. This contrast heightens the sense of human expectation that now hangs heavy in the air. You are approaching a central point of deep human drama, and the world outside seems to be holding its breath in anticipation. The natural soundscape provides a quiet, almost neutral background, preparing the stage for the dramatic entrance of human emotions and events. You realize that for the last long stretch of the path, you have been subconsciously listening for a change, for a break in the natural symphony. The expectation is met as the sounds of the natural world begin to recede, dampened by the slight rise of the ground and the increasing density of the air as you near the structures of the village. The pipe fades first, its thin melody unable to push past the encroaching walls. The goat bells, too, become distant and muted, retreating back into the wilderness. In their place, the new, distinct sounds of human construction and activity begin to assert themselves. You hear the abrupt, resonant scrape of a wooden gate being dragged open across a stone lintel, a heavy, low sound that speaks of old wood and daily routine. This is immediately followed by the thud of the latch falling back into place, a solid punctuation mark. The sound is much louder, clearer, and closer than anything you have heard on the open road. Almost immediately, the low, continuous murmur of voices swells slightly, audible now as more than just a distant hum. These are the sounds of people confined within walls, of shared conversations, and the low, careful tones of those who are grieving. The murmur is constant, but lacks the sharp edges of city noise. It is a gentle tide of human interaction. The overall volume is restrained, confirming the atmosphere of respect and sorrow that defines this village at this time. The contrast is now complete. The silence of the sun-drenched hills has given way to the soft, contained sounds of a communal life paused in grief. The scraped gate and the low voices draw you forward, indicating the edge of the human domain and the immediate proximity of Bethany's walls. The winding path delivers you to the immediate periphery of Bethany with surprising suddenness. After the vast openness of the hills, the low, simple walls of the village seem to rise directly from the earth, built from the very limestone they rest upon. You arrive not at a grand entryway, but at a narrow, unpretentious gate, a simple break in the stacked, rough-cut stone. The walls are not tall, designed for privacy and defense against minor threats rather than grand siege. They are built of uneven, sun-bleached blocks, carefully fitted together with mud and small stones, wearing the marks of time and weather. To pass through this entrance, you must lower your head slightly and turn your body to navigate the narrow passage. This act of humility is a physical acknowledgement that you are entering a private, protected space, leaving the vastness of the wilderness behind. The moment you step beneath the lintel, there is an immediate, profound change in environment. The blinding glare of the midday sun is instantly replaced by the cool, deep shadow of the passage. The difference is shocking, a physical relief that washes over your sun-baked skin. The air inside the passage is dramatically cooler, carrying a damp, earthy chill that has been trapped beneath the heavy stone for hours. It is in this short, transitional space that the distinct smells of the village are concentrated. You breathe deeply and identify the rich, concentrated odor of livestock, the dry, warm scent of goats and sheep penned nearby, mixed with the slightly sharp fermented smell of their fodder. Intermingled with this is the comforting, older smell of cured wood, emanating from the gate itself and the internal support beams, a deep, woody aroma that speaks of stability and age. As you emerge from the immediate shadow, the interior of the village opens before you, a maze of narrow, shadowed lanes. But your attention is immediately drawn to a silent, constant presence positioned just inside the gate. It is a figure, an old man, or perhaps an elderly woman, seated on a low, worn stool set against the wall. They are draped in simple, dark cloth, their hands resting loosely in their lap, completely still. Their stillness is remarkable, a profound quietness that contrasts with the slight movements of the life around them. The face of the figure is etched with deep lines, the texture of their skin like dry parchment, a map of countless summers spent beneath this intense sun. Their eyes are not actively seeking conversation, but they are undeniably present and observant, taking in every arrival, every sound, and every shift in the air. Their expression is not one of welcome or curiosity, but a complex, quiet blend of observation and profound, continuous sorrow. They are the gatekeeper of the village's mood, a silent, external manifestation of the deep grief that has settled over Bethany. You pass the figure with a soft, reverent nod, careful not to break the fragile membrane of their silence. The moment of passing feels significant, as if they have silently registered your presence and your purpose. Their stillness is contagious, forcing your own pace to slow further and your voice to remain completely internalized. You instinctively adjust the tension in your shoulders, recognizing that in this small place, all movements are noted, and respect for the prevailing quiet is mandatory. The narrow lane immediately widens into a small, irregular square used for quiet gathering, but even here, the activity is muted. You notice the rough texture of the ground, packed earth mixed with fragments of stone and clay, that absorbs the sound of your footsteps. The houses that flank this square have few openings, their doors low and recessed, emphasizing the privacy and introversion of the life lived within. The light here is fractured, the intense sunlight reduced to sharp, geometric patches that land momentarily before disappearing into shadow. This initial arrival confirms the atmosphere that preceded it. Bethany is a place held in suspension, a bubble of concentrated sorrow. The old silent figure at the gate is a visual anchor for this mood, their quiet dignity setting the immediate, somber tone. Their presence ensures that every newcomer is instantly aware of the weight carried by the villagers. As you begin to move along the first shadowed alley, leaving the gate and the silent observer behind, you feel the village's atmosphere wrap itself around you, pulling you deeper into its quiet, shared world of loss. The path now leads inward, toward the core of the community where the grieving family resides. Stepping fully into the labyrinthine alleys of Bethany, you become deeply immersed in the unique atmospheric texture of the village. The air itself is not simply inhaled and exhaled. It is a complex presence that seems to press gently against your skin and saturate your senses. The sunlight struggles to penetrate the high walls and the overhanging structures, resulting in a pervasive, gentle dimness that offers a continuous, visual relief. This muted light contributes to the feeling of introspection, a soft shield against the demanding intensity of the outside world. The most striking sensory detail is the distinct blend of local smells that define the village's identity. Strongest among them is the sharp, clean scent of crushed olives. Somewhere nearby, an oil press must be in operation or have recently been used, sending a burst of pungent, slightly sweet, and unmistakably vegetal aroma through the air. This smell is immediately followed by the earthy, grounding odor of damp clay and old stone, the scent of the very materials used to construct the homes. It is a cooling, mineral smell that contrasts with the heat you have just escaped, signifying the presence of stored water and deep foundations. However, beneath these practical, familiar scents lies a more subtle and unsettling layer: the heavy, pervasive odor of wood smoke and freshly turned earth, mixed with something indefinably stale. It is the subtle, pervasive scent of unvented hearths, mixed with the aftermath of recent frantic activity, the smell of soil that has been rapidly disturbed, perhaps for a recent burial. This combination creates an underlying, slightly chemical aroma that hints at the preparations for purification and the efforts to conceal the indelible presence of mortality. This is the olfactory signature of grief itself, a low, continuous note in the village's atmosphere. The core focus of your immersion is how this communal sadness acts as a palpable force, shaping every sound and movement. The atmosphere feels different, thicker, heavier, as if an invisible pressure has been applied to the entire settlement. It is this emotional weight that dampens every sound. The chatter of the market, the playful shouts of children, the normal sounds of domestic labor, all are subdued, muffled, and pushed into the background. The only clearly audible sounds are the soft shushing of robes moving over the packed earth and the occasional hesitant scrape of a ceramic pot being set down with careful attention. You follow a narrow, shadowed alley, the walls so close you could touch both sides with outstretched hands. The coolness of the stone radiates outward, creating a small, constant microclimate of relief. The surface of the alley is worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic, and you notice the small, deep impressions where water has channeled during the rare, heavy rains. This path is clearly well trodden, leading instinctively toward the heart of the village. As you walk, you observe the doorways you pass. They are low and heavily framed with old, dark wood, suggesting a sense of closure and protection. Even when a door is slightly ajar, the sliver of interior you catch sight of is dark and quiet, a sanctuary of deep shadow. The low lintels and thick walls reinforce the sense that this is a community that values shelter, privacy, and the quiet endurance required to live in this landscape. The emotional air of Bethany forces you into a state of deep mindfulness. Your own footsteps, even when soft, feel too loud, and you instinctively moderate your breathing to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention. You are a respectful observer, moving through a space defined by a shared, painful experience. This immersion in the village's sorrowful air is the necessary preparation for approaching the family itself. You must carry the village's respect with you. The alley you follow finally makes a sharp turn, opening into a slightly wider square, dominated by a familiar, slightly larger structure. This house, while still humble, possesses a dignity that marks it as a central point in the community. You recognize the type of construction, the age of the stone, and the subtle activity that distinguishes it from the others. This is the place you have been seeking, the home of Martha, Mary, and the recently departed Lazarus. The pathway has delivered you, guided by the scent of olives and the heavy, sorrowful silence, directly to the heart of the matter. The way forward is clear: to enter the space where the personal grief is concentrated. You now stand before the door of the house. Not a mansion, but a sturdy, substantial dwelling built for the long term, deeply integrated into the fabric of the village. This structure is a perfect reflection of the local architecture, a series of rough-hewn limestone blocks stacked with painstaking care, forming thick, insulating walls. The texture of the stone is rugged and uneven, worn smooth in some places by countless years of hands and shoulders brushing past, yet retaining a grainy, porous feel that speaks of its origin in the dry earth. The windows are deliberately small, narrow slits placed high up near the roofline, designed not to offer a view, but to deny the sun entry. These small openings serve the primary purpose of architecture here, to regulate the immense external heat. The thick mud and straw roof, heavy and dark, acts as a further buffer, a dense layer that absorbs the sun's fury and slowly releases toward the stored heat after dusk. The combination of thick stone and heavy roof creates an internal atmosphere that is perpetually several degrees cooler than the external air, a sanctuary of controlled temperature. The door itself is low and wide, fashioned from dark, aged wood, set into a deep recess in the stone wall. To enter, you must again perform a slight, required stoop, an immediate physical act of deference and humility before crossing the threshold. As you pass through the frame, the transition from the subdued light of the alley to the interior darkness is complete and total. Your eyes take a moment to adjust, but your skin registers the immediate, profound shift in temperature. The intense, sun-baked heat of the outside air is replaced by a rush of cool, dense air, trapped and preserved by the thick stone cells. This coolness is the most tangible expression of the home's interior. It radiates from the floor, cool, packed earth overlaid with simple woven mats, and from the exposed stone of the interior walls. Your fingers instinctively reach out to touch the stone surface, feeling its inert, solid chill, a sensation that is instantly comforting after the long journey. This cooling stone is not only a physical relief, it embodies the quiet refuge needed for grief. It is a place where the senses are calmed, where the blinding light and relentless heat, the constant distractions of the external world, are finally shut out. The interior is sparse but welcoming, organized around the necessities of life in a climate of extremes. The furnishings are low, mats and small carved stools, forcing the occupants to sit closer to the cooling floor. In the muted light, you notice the simple domestic objects: clay jars for water and grain, perhaps a low table, all possessing the weight and simplicity of objects made to last generations. The air inside has the distinct closed-in scent of a home, a blend of baked bread, dried spices, old wood, and the faint, inevitable aroma of the oil used for lamps. The lighting is minimal, filtering weakly through the high slits of windows and the open doorway. This lack of light creates deep, continuous shadows that pool in the corners and cling to the walls. These shadows are not frightening. They are protective, offering a kind of visual privacy even in a room full of people. They encourage quiet voices and slow, deliberate movements. The silence here is a conscious, shared observance, far deeper and more intimate than the silence of the open hills. As your eyes adjust, you begin to distinguish the figures in the room, the shapes of guests and family members moving with a heavy, subdued grace. Your gaze is drawn toward a specific, slightly larger doorway, indicating a more central or significant area, perhaps the main sitting room. This particular doorway is framed by larger, more finely cut stones, and the wood of its lintel is heavier. You pause on the threshold, recognizing this as the final demarcation. This is the central, yet humble, home of Martha, Mary, and the one whose absence defines the atmosphere. The cooling stone walls now hold the concentrated weight of their personal grief, and you are finally standing at the very edge of their profound silence, ready to enter their space. Having paused at the large, silent doorway, you choose not to enter the main house immediately. Instead, you allow your feet to lead you toward the small, communal courtyard situated just behind the home, where the fundamental work of village life continues, even amidst sorrow. This small open space is not paved, but consists of earth worn smooth and firm by the countless journeys of water carriers and the turning of sandals. The area is dominated by the shared well or cistern, the essential heart of the community, a deep, silent repository of life-giving water. The well is simple, constructed of large, circular stones that form a low, solid parapet, the rim of which is significantly grooved and darkened by the friction of generations of ropes. As you approach, you hear the quiet, steady sound of daily routine, a mechanical rhythm that is instantly soothing in its predictability. It is the sound of a thick hemp rope being slowly lowered. Listen to the gradual, continuous scrape, a dry, rasping sound as the rope slides against the worn edge of the stone rim, a sound that speaks of both patience and immense effort. This friction is a quiet acknowledgement of the necessity of the labor. The scraping ceases abruptly, followed by a brief, weightless silence, and then the distinct, muffled splash of the leather bucket hitting the cold water deep below. The sound is muffled by the depth, a singular, satisfying punctuation mark that briefly interrupts the silence of the courtyard. Then comes the slow, rhythmic creaking of the pulley wheel as the rope is hauled back upward. It is a protesting, gentle sound of old wood turning on an oiled spindle, a high-pitched, steady complaint that defines the pace of the work. You can almost feel the strain in the arms pulling the heavy, water-laden bucket toward the lip of the well. This process of water drawing is a slow, domestic ritual, a quiet ceremony performed without haste or drama. It provides a striking contrast to the profound event that hangs over the village and the dramatic miracle that is to come. The life-giving necessity of the well stands in silent judgment of the recent, irreversible end of life in the tomb. Water, the simplest and most essential element of survival, is being drawn and shared, even as the ultimate failure of life is being mourned. The constant presence of the well reminds everyone of the ceaseless, ongoing flow of existence. You observe the subtle, unspoken etiquette of this communal area. Those drawing water move with a measured, considerate pace, avoiding quick movements or unnecessary noise. There is a quiet understanding about the sharing of this resource. Jars are filled and placed carefully on the ground, and the carriers often pause, offering a quiet nod or an exchange of unspoken sympathy to those passing by. The sound of ceramic jars being carefully nested on shoulders, or the gentle sloshing of water inside, is kept to a minimum, ensuring that the necessary function does not intrude upon the atmosphere of respect. You feel the coolness of the courtyard floor beneath your sandals. The packed earth here slightly damper than the dry alleys, a small reservoir of coolness created by the vicinity of the water. The scent here is cleaner, fresher, dominated by the smell of wet stone and clean water, cutting through the smoky, dusty air of the village. It is a moment of calm, a neutral zone where basic human needs override the immediate intensity of grief. The rhythmic creaking of the pulley slowly recedes as the current user finishes filling their last jar and departs, moving silently into the shadow of the nearby buildings. The sound of the scraping rope and the gentle slosh of the water fades entirely, leaving behind only the deep, expectant silence of the courtyard. This silence is immediately heavier, more profound than the sounds of the journey. The natural, external rhythms have stopped, forcing your focus inward. With the noise of the well gone, your attention is drawn back to the walls of the main home. Now, in the sudden absence of the pulley's creak, you become aware of new sounds, human sounds, subtle and contained. These are the unmistakable, muffled sounds of a private gathering taking place just inside the thick stone walls. You hear a low, continuous thrum of voices, too indistinct to make out words, but clearly conveying a collective human presence. The sound is heavy, laden with the slow, undulating cadence of mourning. Occasionally, you catch a higher sound, a brief, suppressed sob, quickly muffled and absorbed by the heavy fabric and thick walls. There is the gentle, repeated sigh of breath being let out, and the slight, dry sound of robes shifting on mats. These sounds indicate the presence of the mourners, the inner circle, the guests, and the sisters themselves, who are gathered in the immediate aftermath of the burial. This audible manifestation of private gathering confirms the core purpose of your presence here and signals the necessary transition from the external, communal space of the well to the intimate, interior space of profound personal sorrow. The domestic rituals have ended. The solemn human gathering awaits. Stepping from the quiet impartiality of the courtyard into the outer section of the grieving home, you find yourself amidst a gathering of local faces, the villagers and guests who have come to pay their respects. This is not the innermost circle, but the outer wave of communal sympathy. Your gaze takes in the collective assembly, noting the texture and appearance of those who have gathered, all moving with a heavy, practiced slowness. The garments of the mourners are simple and uniform in their somberness, plain, undyed linens or rough wools, often draped loosely. You observe the texture of the fabric against their skin, the dry, matte finish of the coarse threads, the subtle wrinkles that speak of hurried preparation and travel. There is a complete lack of ornamentation. The simplicity of their attire reflects the gravity of the occasion and the humble, hard-working nature of this rural community. The scent emanating from the group is a blend of clean, sun-dried fabric and the faint, personal odor of sweat and dust from their own journeys. You begin to study the faces around you, etched with the indelible marks of a life spent under the intense sun and demanding labor. The lines around their eyes and mouths are deep, telling silent stories of hardship and quiet joy. There is a collective expression shared by these local faces, a blend of profound sadness mixed with the quiet, stoic endurance characteristic of people rooted deeply in the land. Their faces are shaded and tanned, their features honest and unvarnished. This silent language of sympathy is perhaps more powerful than any spoken word. An exchange of glances, a subtle, heavy nod, or the gentle placement of a hand on a shoulder conveys everything. The air is filled not with loud wailing or dramatic lament, but with a low, continuous thrum of conversation, a collective murmur that is kept to an extreme low volume. This is the atmosphere of quiet whispers. You listen carefully, catching only fragments of sentences, the sound of vowels and consonants being carefully suppressed. The voices are hushed, intimate, ensuring that their words do not travel beyond the immediate circle of listeners. It is a respect for the sorrow of the sisters, a recognition that this grief requires a low, reverent hum. The topics of these whispers circulate slowly, repeating the painful narrative that brought them all together. You hear the soft, repeated words about the sickness, the suddenness of it, the fever that could not be broken, the swift decline of Lazarus. Then the whispers turn to the delay, the agonizing waiting for the one person they believed could intervene, the Master. You catch the sound of confusion and gentle doubt in the lowered tones, the universal human struggle to reconcile deep faith with visible, immediate tragedy. Why did he wait? The unasked question seems to hover in the cool, still air. Most frequently, the hushed voices speak of the deep and well-known love that existed between Yis and this family. They recall past visits, the easy laughter, the sense of refuge Jesus found in this humble home away from the political turmoil of Jerusalem. This shared memory of affection is the thread that connects all the mourners, the reason for their silent devotion. The whispers confirm that this is not merely the death of a man, but a personal tragedy for the community and for the itinerant teacher who has clearly lost a dear friend. You move slowly through the room, becoming a part of the quiet tableau. The stillness of the conversation is hypnotic, drawing your focus in completely. You sense the shared understanding that the most profound grief, the true core of the sorrow, resides deeper within the house, with the two sisters, Mary and Martha. The quiet, repetitive nature of the conversation acts as an auditory path, a gentle, gravitational pull toward the most private space, where the professional mourners have been called and the immediate family waits. The local faces, in their humble clothes and quiet devotion, now recede slightly into the shadow. As your gaze is drawn to a specific curtained doorway at the rear of the room. This opening, unlike the others, is guarded by silence and a heavier drape of fabric, signaling its importance as the final sanctuary. The soft, continuous whispering in the outer room has done its work, setting the tone of reverence and allowing you to follow the hushed current toward the innermost chamber, where the sisters are isolated in the heart of their mourning. You cross the final threshold, moving from the low, conversational hum of the outer gathering into the intimate, protected interior of the grieving home. The atmosphere immediately deepens. The sounds of the whispers are fully muffled by the thickness of the stone walls and the heavy curtain across the entrance, creating a space defined by a profound internal silence. This room is the sanctuary of immediate, raw sorrow, a place where the world's noise has been purposefully shut out. Your feet settle onto the cool, packed earth floor, a firm, slightly gritty surface that absorbs sound and radiates a gentle chill upward. This floor is the foundation of the room, covered in thick, woven mats, simple rush or reed material that are soft and yielding beneath your weight. The texture of these mats is dry and rough against your skin, a comforting simplicity that contrasts with the complexity of the emotions being held within the room. You move slowly, recognizing the sacred necessity of quiet in this confined space. The interior environment is dark, a deep well of shadow, broken only by the single point where a weak beam of light manages to penetrate the high, narrow window slit. This beam enters the room at a sharp, downward angle, illuminating a small specific patch of the earthen floor with a pale, ethereal glow. The light is not enough to dispel the darkness, but it serves as a visual anchor, drawing the eye and emphasizing the dimness of the surrounding space. The rest of the room is swathed in continuous shadow, creating an environment that feels both protected and deeply contemplative. You register the unique, closed-in scent of the home, a complex aroma that speaks of continuous habitation and ritual. Dominant among these are the sweet, slightly smoky scent of oil lamps, not currently burning, but their residue clinging to the air, blended with the dry, fragrant odor of dried herbs. These herbs, perhaps hyssop or rosemary, would have been used for purification and cleansing, their scent providing a clean, sharp edge to the air, an attempt to cleanse the lingering presence of sickness and death. The overall smell is comforting, an ancient balm against the intrusion of distress. This profound immersion in the home's quiet, protected atmosphere establishes the perfect context for the events to come. It is a space of withdrawal, a place where faith is tested, and where the world's physical realities, its heat, its noise, its urgent demands, are held at bay. This intense internal calm sets up the most powerful contrast with the chaos and commotion of the external world that will soon intrude. The deep silence is a fragile membrane, ready to be violently broken. You allow your eyes to adjust fully to the darkness, taking in the shapes that populate the room. The low furnishings melt into the shadows, the walls receding into indistinct planes. The air pressure seems heavier here, almost palpable, making every breath feel deliberate and deep. The sounds are minimal, the rustle of a mourner's sigh, the occasional soft clink of a coin being adjusted in a pocket, the distant, muffled sound of the village outside, all rendered distant and inconsequential. In the deepest corner of the room, away from the immediate door and the faint beam of light, you finally notice the two distinct shadows. They are huddled figures, seated low on the mats, their forms draped in heavy, dark fabric that seems to absorb all available light. They are the sisters, Mary and Martha, the twin centers of this domestic sorrow. Their stillness is profound, a shared, silent posture of grief that speaks more powerfully than any outward display. One figure seems slightly more agitated, shifting subtly on the mat, a small, continuous motion that hints at internal restlessness. The other is entirely static, a figure of absolute repose, her head perhaps resting against the wall. They are introduced to you not by voice or action, but by their shadow and their stillness, defining the core emotional energy of the space. To approach them is to approach the heart of the village's sorrow, the point where the loss is most acute and the expectation of comfort most urgent. Your attention settles first on the figure who displays movement, the sister known as Martha. Even in the dense shadow of the interior, her presence is defined by a subtle, continuous energy, a quiet restlessness that contrasts sharply with the deep stillness of the room. She is the architect of worry and the embodiment of structured welcome. Her grief expressed not in passive silence, but in the constant, necessary act of tending. You observe the texture of her clothing, simple utilitarian garments, perhaps darker than usual, but practical, betraying no sign of neglect despite her sorrow. Her outer robe is often adjusted, the slight dry hush of the linen being smoothed over her knees or pulled tighter around her shoulders, being one of the few audible sounds in the room. This slight movement is a constant physical tick, a nonverbal expression of internal tension, the manifestation of a mind that cannot fully rest while duties remain. When she moves, it is with a specific sound, a light, quick tap-tap of her feet on the woven mats. A sound that is too fast, too efficient for a person fully consumed by passive grief. She rises occasionally, moving with an almost mechanical precision to adjust a cushion, refill a cup of water for a guest, or straighten a crooked mat. Her hands are constantly in motion, strong and capable, yet moving with a careful, controlled grace, ensuring that her domestic service does not disrupt the solemnity. Her voice, when she speaks to a visiting mourner, is kept carefully low, a controlled instrument of social grace. It possesses a slightly strained quality, the careful control, revealing the fierce, internal tension she holds between her profound grief and her inherited duty to hospitality. She is simultaneously the grieving sister and the meticulous hostess, struggling to maintain the order of the home, even as her world has been thrown into chaos. Her voice is calm, but the pitch is held just a fraction too high, betraying the immense, fragile strain beneath the surface. This internal tension is the defining characteristic of her presence. Her blend of faith, grief, and domestic duty creates a continuous mental war. She believes, fundamentally, in the power of the one she calls master, yet her human reality is defined by the 3-day absence that resulted in death. You can sense her mind replaying the moments, the arrival of the messenger, the painful waiting, the finality of the burial. Her tending to the guests is her way of managing the unmanageable, a means of imposing order on the universe that has just betrayed her. Observe the action of her hands as she pours a drink from a small clay jug. The stream of water is steady, the lip of the jug carefully prevented from touching the cup, a minute focus on hygiene and correctness. She offers the cup with a gesture that is both welcoming and utterly exhausted. She does not look directly into the mourner's eyes, preferring to focus on the task itself, allowing the small, repetitive actions to serve as a meditative shield against her overwhelming pain. Each act of service is a quiet assertion that life, however painful, must still be conducted. The subtle movements and low murmurs continue, creating a low-grade, constant presence. Then, suddenly, the movement stops. Martha, in the middle of straightening a cushion or moving a stool, freezes. Her body, accustomed to continuous motion, becomes unnaturally still. You notice the slight tension in her neck as her head turns, her gaze drawn not to the interior of the room, but toward the light source of the main door. Her eyes, shadowed and tired, have caught the briefest flicker, a shadow that is too large, too distinct, or too quickly moving to be one of the known stationary mourners. This unexpected visual disruption breaks the careful domestic routine she has so arduously maintained. The abrupt cessation of her movement signals that an event, external and powerful, has just begun to intrude upon the quiet privacy of their grief. The arrival, though unseen, has been registered, and her attention is entirely claimed by the developing drama at the threshold. While Martha's presence is defined by movement and the control of the immediate environment, the focus now shifts entirely to the other sister, Mary, whose posture is one of profound, unwavering stillness. She remains low, seated on the woven mat in the deepest shadow of the room, a deliberate seeker of silence who has withdrawn completely into the shelter of grief. Her quietude is a physical refusal to engage with the demands of the living or the rituals of hospitality. You observe the quality of the light that falls upon her, or rather, the near total absence of it. She is an island of shadow, yet the subtle curves of her form, draped in heavy, dark fabric, convey a sense of deep, internal reflection. There is no fidgeting, no restless movement of hands or feet. Her stillness is absolute, embodying a resignation that is both painful and strangely dignified. She seems, at this moment, completely disconnected from the room and its occupants, her energy directed entirely inward toward the contemplation of her loss. The texture of her hair, perhaps unbraided or simply covered in a loose, heavy scarf, adds to the sense of weight and repose. Her clothing hangs heavy, creating a sculptural, unmoving shape that is entirely absorbed by the dim light. This outward immobility suggests a mind fiercely engaged in a profound, internal dialogue, one that goes beyond the immediate practical necessities of the hour. She is not merely resting. She is wrestling with the ultimate silence left by her brother. The weight of her silence is immense, a powerful, magnetic force that dominates the room more effectively than Martha's anxious motion. It is the silence of a soul, communing not with the living guests who offer their platitudes, but with the idea of her brother, his absence, his memory, and the painful gap he has left behind. You can sense the depth of her devotion, the way her faith and her love have been fractured by the finality of the tomb. Her grief is a form of deep prayer, a silent, unbroken communion with the invisible. She is a figure of quiet, enduring devotion, allowing the heavy, cool air of the room to settle around her like a protective balm. Every breath she takes seems measured, deep, and slow. The few times the light shifts slightly, you might catch a faint shimmer on her cheek, suggesting a tear that was shed long ago and has since dried, leaving only the mark of its passing. She has moved beyond the first shock and settled into a constant state of internal reckoning. However, the sustained moment of stillness is abruptly, violently broken. The disruption comes not from within the room, but from the sudden, sharp commotion outside the house. A noise that is too loud, too sudden, and too insistent for the somber atmosphere of Bethany. It is a mix of hurried footfalls, hushed but urgent voices, and a clear, distinct calling of names. The news, the announcement of the Master's imminent arrival at the outskirts of the Saarland village, has finally reached the inner sanctuary. In that instant, Mary's absolute repose shatters. Her body, which had been a study in stillness, springs immediately into action. Her movement is rapid and singular, a burst of focused energy that contrasts with the slow, grieving pace she had maintained. There is no hesitation, no question of duty, only the pure, instinctive drive toward the one she trusts. She rises quickly from the mat, the heavy linen of her robes creating a brief, dry whoosh as she stands. Her gaze, which was fixed inward, now snaps outward, directed toward the door and the commotion beyond. Her sudden, single-minded departure signals the end of the home's immediate period of passive mourning, as she quickly moves toward the path that leads inevitably out of the village, up the rocky slope, and to the cold, silent truth of the tomb. The sudden, sharp commotion outside, which has startled Mary from her deep stillness, briefly arrests the entire room, demanding a momentary pause from grief itself. Before you follow her swift exit, the heavy atmosphere of the room compels a pause, allowing the mind to turn back to the ritualistic significance of this specific time, the profound cultural weight of the 4-day period after death. This timing is not coincidental. It is the absolute final echo of Jewish mourning tradition, a point of no return embedded in the ancient beliefs about the transition of the soul. The core belief, held firmly by the people of this time, was that the nephesh, the soul or life essence, remained near the body for 3 days after death. It lingered, hovering over the physical shell, attempting perhaps to re-enter, to cling to the warmth and familiarity of the recently departed form. During these 3 days, there was a fragile, terrifying hope, the possibility, however remote, of revival. Relatives and friends would gather, not only to mourn, but also to watch, driven by the slim chance that the spark of life might be relit before the final corruption set in. The body was guarded, the tomb entrance left perhaps slightly less final, as if the physical barrier might impede the soul's return. But the 4th day represented the absolute ultimate separation. By this time, the process of decay would be unmistakable, beginning the visible corruption that confirmed the soul's departure. The nephesh, recognizing the irreversible change in its earthly vessel, would finally and definitively move on, separating permanently from the body and the world of the living. The 4th day sealed the verdict, replacing the anxious hope of the first 3 with the cold, scientific certainty of finality. This moment transforms grief from an anxious vigil into a sober, irreversible acknowledgement of loss. Lazarus has now been in the tomb for 4 days. The stone has been rolled into place. The initial mourning has passed, and the cultural timeline dictates that the window for any miraculous return is not merely closed, but sealed, cemented by the very process of nature. When Martha spoke her words of faith mixed with doubt, her reference to the 4 days was not simply a statement of elapsed time, but a profound theological declaration. The situation is hopeless. The body is corrupted. The soul is gone. This finality is what lends the village's sorrow its deep, continuous texture. You focus your internal listening on the sounds that define this final seal of mourning. Though the actual process is over, the sound of the dirt being piled near the tomb lingers in the memory of the community. It is a slow, heavy thud and scrape, the sound of earth, dry and unforgiving, being moved with spades and hands, the physical act of preparing the burial site. It is the sound of finality, the covering of the last earthly trace, the quiet, heavy assertion that one life has returned to the soil from which it came. The sound of this work is deeply solemn, performed without the rhythm of cheerful labor, but with the necessary, grave pace of mourners. The shoveling is interspersed with long, painful silences, where the only sound is the heavy, ragged breath of the workers and the low, collective sigh of those watching. Each handful of earth that covered the tomb's approach was a ritualistic act of severance, a physical cutting of the ties between the living and the dead. Within the interior of the house, the silence following this ritual is heavy, an echo of the dirt's finality. It is a silence that says, "This is done. This cannot be undone." The mourners have accepted the 4-day judgment, moving from a position of fragile hope to one of resigned, continuous sadness. The air in the room, cool and dense, feels heavy with this collective acceptance. It is this absolute, irreversible finality of the 4 days that makes the commotion outside so violently disruptive. The sound of hurried footfalls and urgent voices is not a part of the ritual. It is a trespass against the settled sorrow. The news of the Master's arrival is a sudden, terrifying injection of possibility into a situation that has already been declared closed by both time and tradition. It breaks the sacred cultural timeline, shattering the quiet finality of the process. Mary's swift, instantaneous departure is the physical reaction to this broken silence. Her movement is a rejection of the 4-day judgment, a rush back toward the only source of hope that could possibly overturn the irrevocable verdict of time and decay. The ritual of grief is violently interrupted by the urgent, improbable arrival of the one who arrives too late, yet carries the terrifying possibility that late may still mean possible. The door through which she passed now stands slightly ajar, letting a sliver of the afternoon light fall across the cool floor, signaling the shift from interior sorrow to external confrontation at the place of final rest. Mary's sudden, single-minded departure pulls the momentum of the narrative out of the shadowed quiet of the house and back into the late afternoon sun. The procession that follows her, a mix of immediate family, sympathetic villagers, and the now silent mourners, leaves the village walls and begins the short, steep ascent toward the burial site. This is a path of necessity, marked by the recent traffic of the burial party, leading quickly away from the domestic order of Bethany and into the rough, unforgiving terrain just beyond. The path is immediately more challenging than the road that led into the village. It is a narrow, rocky scramble that winds upward between dense, low-lying scrub. Your focus shifts entirely to the physical difficulty of the walk. The ground is composed of loose, sharp limestone scree, making every footfall an exercise in careful balance. The sound of the group's movement is defined by the scraping of sandals on these loose rocks, a continuous, low shh sound that rises whenever a foot slips slightly on the unstable footing. It is a hesitant, reverent sound, the pace dictated by the exhaustion and the emotional gravity of the journey. The air, though still warm, is now moving slightly, stirred by the effort of the climb. With every step, your feet crush the low, hardy vegetation that clings to life on the dry slopes. This releases a powerful, sharp scent into the air. The volatile oils of rosemary, wild thyme, and various bitter herbs are immediately present. A sudden, aromatic burst that overpowers the smoky smell of the village. It is a clean, resinous aroma, the scent of the natural world performing its relentless cycle of life and death, entirely separate from human sorrow. The movement of the group is slow, deliberate, and deeply reverent. No one speaks. The urgency that propelled Mary from the house has been channeled into this silent, steady, physical effort. Every head is bowed, partly to watch the precarious footing, and partly out of the weight of the moment. The silence of this procession is different from the contained quiet of the house. It is an active, focused silence, an acknowledgement that they are moving toward the final, visible symbol of their loss. You notice the slight movements of Mary ahead, her dark robes moving with a speed that is still astonishing in this terrain. Her energy drawn entirely from the desperate hope that drives her. The group struggles to keep pace, their hesitation born of the knowledge that they are approaching a conclusion they have already been forced to accept. This movement toward the tomb is the ultimate act of confrontation with reality, and the body's reluctance to make the climb mirrors the soul's reluctance to face the unchangeable fact of death. The path crests abruptly. The loose, rocky scramble gives way to a small, bare clearing, a flattened, desolate patch of earth that has been deliberately cleared of stones and scrub. The change in the ground is immediate and total, providing solid, final footing. In the center of this clearing, carved into the bare face of the rock, stands the mouth of the tomb. The sight of the entrance stops all forward movement. The entire group halts, simultaneously and silently. The sounds of scraping sandals instantly cut off by the shift in the ground. The tomb is not an accidental cave. It is a deliberate, man-made cavity, rough-hewn and dark, set into the natural rock face. But the attention is immediately and irreversibly drawn to the barrier that seals it. A heavy, unmoving disk of stone, the gallows, rests in the carved groove before the opening. It is massive, a monument to permanence, a physical declaration that the body within has been laid to rest and will not be disturbed. The stone is a flat, solid circle, its presence utterly dominating the clearing. Its gray, sun-bleached surface reflects the afternoon light, making it the focal point of the entire scene. The entire journey has led to this confrontation with the stone. It is the final, heavy full stop at the end of a long sentence of grief. Its sheer, unyielding presence stops breath and movement alike. The silence returns, but this time It is a shocked, final silence, broken only by the sound of heavy, collective breathing as the group gathers their breath and prepares to face the unmoving fact of the tomb. With the group silently assembled in the bare clearing, all focus converges upon the entrance of the tomb, specifically the heavy stone that seals it. This is the gallows, the millstone of finality, and it is a piece of rough-hewn masonry engineered for one purpose: permanence. You approach the entrance for a detailed inspection, noting the immense, deliberate scale of the barrier. The stone is a massive circular disc, its edge slightly thicker than its center, allowing it to rest securely within a custom-carved groove in the rock floor. Its color is the pale, sun-bleached gray of local limestone, but closer inspection reveals swirling, deep veins of iron-rich red and earthy brown within its grain. The surface is uneven, bearing the rough marks of the tools that shaped it, primitive axes and chisels, a testament to the enormous human effort required to detach it from the quarry and drag it into position. This stone is not smooth. Its texture is dry, cold, and porous, absorbing the sun's heat slowly and radiating a chilling coolness deep into the afternoon. The mechanics of its placement are simple but devastatingly effective. The entrance to the tomb is slightly lower than the ground of the clearing, and a deep semicircular groove has been chiseled into the rock before the opening. The stone disc rests securely in this groove, and to roll it into place, it must have been manually pushed down a slight incline, its own overwhelming weight providing the final sealing force. Once settled, it is nearly impossible to move without coordinated, strenuous effort, effectively turning the tomb into an absolute, permanent vault. The stone's sheer, overwhelming weight screams the word finality. It is an object designed to declare that the business of this life is over, that the resident inside has crossed an immutable boundary. The exposed rock face surrounding the sealed entrance is cold and dry to the touch, the same temperature as the stone disc itself, completing the impression of a deep, impenetrable barrier. No breath of fresh air could pass this seal. No sound from the living world could penetrate the thick rock. It is a symbol of absolute separation. The silence that has gripped the group is maintained, punctuated only by the occasional, restless movement of a foot on the loose scree. Mary and Martha stand slightly apart, their eyes fixed on the cold, gray disc, the last, massive object that separates them from their brother. The silence hangs heavy with unexpressed grief, with the weight of the 4 days, and with the desperate, almost foolish hope that brought them here. It is into this profound silence that the shocking command is finally delivered. The words, when spoken, are quiet, but carry a terrifying authority. Move the stone. The simple instruction shatters the atmosphere of settled, irreversible mourning. The stone is meant to be permanent, a boundary never to be crossed lightly, and the simple act of ordering its removal is a direct challenge to the finality of the 4 days. The reaction of the nearby men is one of hesitation and quiet protest, a low, urgent whisper that speaks of the social and biological offense of the command. They know the reason the stone is in place. They understand the meaning of the 4th day. They know the condition of the body within. And the simple effort required to move the stone is overshadowed by the deeper cultural offense of disturbing the irreversible process of the dead. But the command holds. The hesitation fades, replaced by a grim necessity. Several men step forward, placing their hands on the cold, rough surface of the galel. They lean into the stone, their muscles straining, their breath held. The initial attempt yields nothing, only the low, continuous groan of effort. Then, with a unified surge of energy and the loud, guttural sound of grunting exertion, the stone begins to move. The sound that follows is grating and horrible. The high-pitched, tearing RR sk of heavy, rough rock on rock. The sound of stone protesting its disturbance. It is a dry, tearing sound that slices through the afternoon air, echoing across the bare clearing. Slowly, tortuously, the massive disc rolls back a short distance along the chiseled groove, exposing the dark, square mouth of the tomb. The light immediately falls upon the disturbed earth beneath where the stone had rested, revealing the wet, dark patch of earth that confirms the airtight seal. The moment the stone settles into its new, temporary position, the sound ceases, leaving the gaping, black void of the tomb entrance exposed to the world. With the heavy millstone of finality rolled aside, the transition from the sunlit world of the living to the absolute, closed-off world of the dead is immediate and sensory. The entrance of the tomb, the dark, gaping square now exposed to the afternoon light, acts as a vent. And the first thing to rush out is not visible, but overwhelmingly palpable. A torrent of air, unlike anything experienced outside. The first sensation is the cold, a shocking, physical contrast to the lingering heat of the Judean afternoon. It is a blast of chilled, damp air that streams out of the dark opening, pushing against the faces of those standing closest. This is the cold of ancient rock, the air trapped for days in the deep, unyielding earth, insulated from the sun's warmth and the flow of the outside world. This rush of cold air is the tomb's first silent proclamation of its existence, a physical marker of the world within. Following the initial chill, the air immediately defines itself by its heavy, cold, mineral-rich smell. It is the distinct aroma of ancient, dry limestone, a cold, metallic, earthy scent that speaks of stone dust and deep, subterranean quiet. This smell is utterly devoid of vegetation or life, possessing a sterile, geological quality, the scent of the earth's raw, silent composition. It is a clean yet heavy air, a profound meditation on the distinct, closed-off atmosphere of the burial vault. The smell is thick, clinging to the inside of the nostrils, confirming the deep, unventilated nature of the chamber. This air is the essence of the coque, the interior cave, a space that has been sealed not for a few hours, but for 4 full days. It is a stagnant atmosphere, pressurized by the heat difference, now escaping into the open. The cold air wraps itself around the exposed skin of the mourners, a tangible reminder of the cold, final state of the occupant within. The silence of the group deepens further, their collective breath held in anticipation and dread. The cold, mineral scent dominates for only a few brief moments before a subtle, sickening change begins to assert itself. It starts as a faint, inevitable undertone, slowly mixing with the fresh metallic smell of the rock. This is the final, inevitable proclamation of the fourth day. It is the scent that follows the clean, cold air, the aroma that signifies the true, irreversible reality of death. It is a low, sickening sweetness, a heavy, unavoidable odor of corruption and decay, the unmistakable scent of putrefaction that confirms Martha's quiet, fearful warning. The smell is concentrated, powerful, and utterly uncompromising. It forces an immediate physical reaction from those assembled. A collective, involuntary recoil, a slight step backward, a protective hand raised instinctively to cover the nose and mouth. This physical gesture of repulsion speaks volumes. It is the final acknowledgement that the 4 days have passed and that life's processes have reached their point of no return. The sight of the dark opening and the rush of that offensive air transforms the hope and hesitation of the journey into a raw, painful reality. It is a smell that cannot be reasoned with or denied, overpowering the clean scent of the crushed herbs on the path. The stench is the final, physical proof of the tomb's function. All pretense of a possible, spontaneous recovery is instantly erased by this one overwhelming sensory input. The air in the clearing is suddenly thick with dread. The master, who stands nearest to the opening, breathes in the offensive smell without flinching, his presence a still point in the wave of human recoil. His confrontation with this scent is a confrontation with the full biological reality of death, the very corruption that the tomb was built to contain. The stench has done its work, reducing the hopeful crowd to a collection of silent, sickened witnesses who now await the impossible command that must follow such a final, terrible reality. With the heavy stone rolled aside and the initial, sickening rush of air past, the attention of the assembled crowd is forced, against its will, to peer into the absolute, overwhelming darkness of the tomb's interior. The exterior shock of cold air and decay gives way to a deeper, more detailed contemplation of the space that has held the deceased for 4 full days. This is a rock-cut tomb, a permanent structure carved by hand into the solid limestone bedrock, designed not as a temporary grave, but as an enduring familial vault. You can peer through the dark opening and mentally map the man-made features of the space. The ceiling, though low, is not entirely regular, bearing the rough marks of the tools used in its excavation. It is slightly arched and uneven, creating a sense of deep, compressed confinement within the rock. The floor is cold, smooth, and utterly level, carefully chiseled to provide a stable surface, but now likely dusted with the fine powder created by the decay of the burial linens. This floor adds to the profound sense of stillness, absorbing any light and muffling any sound. The walls are thick, rough-cut stone, forming a small, contained chamber, a square or rectangular cavity created by the deliberate removal of solid rock. These walls are the definitive barrier, shutting out the sun, the wind, and the continuous flow of life outside. The most crucial feature of the interior is the narrow burial shelf, or coke, a carved niche that runs perpendicular to the chamber wall, deep enough to hold a fully extended body. This shelf is not merely a place to lay the body. It is a permanent storage space for the wrapped remains, a designated slot in the rock that declares the finality of the inhabitant's rest. These niches are the primary purpose of the tomb, defining its function as a house for the dead. You contemplate the absolute light-devouring quality of the darkness within the chamber. Even with the afternoon sun streaming through the narrow entrance, the light penetrates only a short distance, quickly surrendering to the profound shadow. The darkness is not merely the absence of light. It is a presence, heavy and dense, a visual manifestation of the eternal, dreamless sleep. It swallows every detail, every edge, ensuring that the occupant is hidden from view and protected from the scrutiny of the living world. The stillness within this dark chamber is the final element, a profound, unmoving silence that seems to press outward, imposing its quiet permanence on the entire clearing. The entire tomb is an anatomy of coldness and finality, a space designed for irreversible rest. The exposed rock is perpetually cool, acting as a natural preservative, slowing the processes of nature, but not stopping them entirely. It is a space designed by humans to respect the cycle of life and death, confirming the separation of the soul and the return of the body to the earth's keeping. The silence that has reigned since the stone was moved is finally broken by a voice, a low, precise sound that cuts through the stillness. It is the voice of someone who has attended to the burial rites, someone who knows the exact placement of the remains within the darkness. The voice is practical, devoid of emotion, focusing only on the coordinates of the loss. It speaks of the shelf, the wrappings, and the position of the body. The words draw the collective attention of the group to the precise location of the wrapped body within the tomb. The darkness is now mentally mapped, and though the body remains obscured, its position on the burial shelf is now known. The voice of the living has completed the final, necessary act of defining the contents of the rock-cut tomb, setting the stage for the next, impossible command that must challenge the very architecture of this final resting place. The voice that defined the coordinates of the wrapped body within the darkness has faded, leaving a final, charged silence at the mouth of the tomb. Though the body remains in shadow, the mind of the witness is now drawn to the final, intimate details of the deceased, the materials that define his separation from the world of the living. This chapter offers a close-up, sensory study of the burial wrappings, imagining the texture and scent that lie hidden within the rock-cut shelf. The body of Lazarus would be encased in long, continuous strips of fine linen cloth, wrapped tightly from head to foot, a meticulous, ritualistic process designed to prepare the remains for their final rest. You focus on the texture of this linen strip, visualizing the dry, brittle quality it would now possess after 4 days in the cool, mineral-rich environment of the tomb. The cloth is not soft. It is stiffened, its fibers already beginning the long, slow process of hardening due to the dryness of the air and the application of the embalming materials. Each fold and overlap would be sharp, defined, creating a casing of cloth rather than a loose draping. The linen would bear subtle staining, perhaps the faint, indelible brown left by the bodily fluids or the darker, stickier patches where the embalming resins were applied most heavily. This is the visual signature of death and preparation, a testament to the hands that perform the last acts of care. The cloth is dry, and the slightest movement would produce a papery, brittle sound, a light, rasping scuff that is the audible texture of ancient, stored fabric. Overwhelming the scent of the cold limestone and the underlying corruption is the dried, sweet but heavy fragrance of the spices used in the burial, the myrrh and aloes. These were expensive, precious resins, ground and mixed, then pressed or poured between the layers of the linen strips. The scent is a complex mixture. The dry, bittersweet, earthy pungency of the myrrh, combined with the slightly sweeter, medicinal aroma of the aloes. These spices were intended to preserve the body, or at least to counter the inevitability of decay. Now, after the passage of 4 days, this sweet, heavy scent has itself begun to change. It is no longer a fresh perfume of preservation, but a dense, clinging odor, mingled irrevocably with the sickening reality of decay. The two scents exist in agonizing tension. The expensive, deliberate perfume attempting to hold back the natural process, and the unstoppable, heavy stench of mortality asserting its dominance. It is a scent that communicates both immense love and the failure of all human efforts against death. The blend is thick in the imagination, clinging to the air that rushes out of the tomb's opening. Finally, you consider the placement of the face cloth, the sudarium, which would have been placed separately from the main wrappings. This small, square piece of linen, less stiff than the main strips, would have been placed gently over Lazarus's head, covering the eyes. A final act of separation and reverence. Its presence is a focused detail of care and closure, distinguishing the face from the rest of the body. Its material would be finer, perhaps softer, carrying a concentrated presence of the sweetest aloes nearest to the lips and nose. The focus on these inanimate wrappings, the dry texture, the mixed scent of spice and corruption, serves to underline the absolute physical finality of the state within the tomb. Lazarus is wrapped, sealed, scented, and irretrievably gone. The silence and the stench confirm the permanence of his resting place. The mind now shifts from observing these internal, inanimate details to focusing on the palpable, collective energy of the crowd gathered outside. The individual senses that defined the tomb, the cold air, the metallic rock, the sweet decay, now dissolve into the larger, single atmosphere of the clearing. The crowd is a single organism now, every head turned toward the dark, gaping hole, every breath held in anticipation. The energy radiating from the witnesses is almost physical, a dense mixture of fear, disbelief, and a terrifying, irrational hope. They are poised at the edge of the unprecedented. They have seen the stone moved, smelled the proof of the fourth day, and heard the voice of the living defining the position of the dead. Now, they are waiting for the impossible, their collective tension creating a pressure that is almost visible in the late afternoon air. The narrator's attention, having detailed the private closure of the dead, is fully surrendered to the public expectation of the living, poised for the moment when silence must give way to either triumph or final, damning proof of failure. Pulling back from the dark focus of the tomb entrance, your attention expands to encompass the crowd that has gathered in the bare, rocky clearing. This is now more than just the immediate family and the professional mourners from Bethany. It is a gathering of the witness, composed of the curious who followed the commotion, the skeptical who came to confirm the finality of the death, and the faithful who cling to a frail thread of possibility. They form a dense, irregular arc before the open mouth of the vault, a physical manifestation of collective human expectation. The sheer variety of the faces and the conflicting intentions they conceal create a deeply complex atmosphere. The sound that defines this mass of people is the low, continuous shh of sandaled feet shifting on the loose stones and dry earth. No one is fully still. The collective anxiety compels constant, minor adjustments. A slight step back from the stench, a lean forward toward the master, a movement to steady oneself on the uneven ground. This sound is the audible manifestation of their shared tension, the dry, scraping noise of hundreds of leather soles on tiny, unforgiving pebbles. It is a nervous, low-grade sound, constantly threatening to break the silence, but held in check by the profound gravity of the moment. The texture of this sound is abrasive, a constant reminder of the rough terrain and the uneasy footing of their current reality. You observe the texture of their outer robes, now catching the light of the sinking sun. These garments are dry, dusty, and heavy, creating a uniform, somber backdrop of muted colors, earth tones, off-whites, and the dark gray of morning. The fabric is thick wool or coarsely woven linen, designed for utility and resilience rather than comfort. The air, though now cooling slightly, still holds the memory of the day's heat, and the fine dust stirred by their shifting feet catches the low-angled light, giving the atmosphere a hazy, expectant quality. The light illuminates the fine details of their attire, the worn patches, the simple ties, the slight disarray that comes from the hurried ascent up the rocky path. The faces of the crowd are a gallery of human emotion, etched by sun and labor, now fully exposed by the intense late afternoon light. There is a universal mixture of fear and fervent hope, but within that blend lie 1,000 variations of doubt and anticipation. The skeptical observers, many of whom are scholars or officials who traveled from Jerusalem, wear expressions of grim certainty, their lips pressed tight. They are ready to see the master exposed as merely human, his authority halted by the immutable law of decay and the 4-day limit. They stand ready to judge the outcome, their skepticism a rigid protective shield against the possibility of the divine. The faces of the faithful, particularly the women from Bethany and the disciples, are stretched taut with an almost painful optimism. Their eyes are wide, unblinking, fixed on the master with a desperation that transcends reason. They know what is within. They smell the proof of corruption, yet they hope for a miracle that defies all logic, physics, and tradition. This hope is visible as a kind of fragile, luminous tension that contrasts sharply with the shadowed skepticism nearby. Your focus narrows to a single set of eyes near the front, belonging to an older man whose face is deeply lined, weathered by decades of agricultural toil. His eyes hold a quality of raw, fearful disbelief, not necessarily in the master's power, but in the terrifying, unprecedented nature of the request. This look is one of absolute shock, a silent acknowledgement that they are moments away from either a profound, world-changing act of divine power or a final, embarrassing failure of faith against the simple, biological reality of death. He is wrestling with the simple fact that what is being asked violates everything he has ever known about the natural order of the universe. The collective energy of the crowd is a compressed spring, coiled tight with anticipation. Every neck is craned, every shadow cast points toward the tomb. They are all caught in the same inescapable current of expectation. The continuous low-grade sound of shifting and whispering that defined the gathering now begins a gradual, almost magical process of recession. As the master takes his final, silent steps toward the opening, a wave of involuntary quiet washes over the assembly. One by one, the minor, nervous movements cease. The hushed whispers about the 4 days, the illness, and the delay die out as the attention of every single person becomes singular and absolute. The low shh of the sandals stops entirely. The only sounds remaining are the high-pitched buzz of a fly near the tomb entrance and the heavy, ragged breath of the individuals themselves. The entire mass of people, skeptic and believer, mourner and curious, falls into a silence that is total and profound. This is not just quiet. It is an intense, collective holding of breath, a shared, heavy stillness, ready for the singular sound of the command. The crowd has transformed from a collection of individuals into a single, fused witness, waiting for the definitive word that will either justify their faith or confirm their deepest fears. The atmosphere in the clearing has now reached a point of absolute, intense quietude. This is not merely the absence of sound, but a deep dive into the moment just before the miracle, a time defined by the oppressive heat and heavy stillness that settles over the silent assembly. The large, shuffling body of the crowd, which was audible moments ago, has completely fallen silent, its energy focused into a dense, unmoving mass that absorbs all ambient sound. The heat of the late afternoon sun, though beginning its slow, perceptible descent towards the horizon, feels magnified by the sudden lack of noise and movement. It presses down upon the silent assembly, a dry, oppressive weight that emphasizes the vulnerability of their living, breathing bodies against the cold, dead rock of the tomb. The light is blindingly intense, casting sharp, deep shadows on the faces of the witnesses, further isolating the dark, black square of the tomb entrance. Every detail of the dry earth and the sharp limestone rocks seems amplified by the lack of noise, achieving a hyper-real clarity. In this sudden vacuum of external sound, the focus is drawn entirely to the involuntary, quiet sounds of life itself, the subtle, desperate symphony of living organisms enduring the heat and the profound tension. The ears of the listeners become acutely aware of the smallest, most personal internal noises. You hear the slightest involuntary catch of a cough being suppressed, quickly muffled by a sleeve or a hand, a brief, ragged sound, instantly absorbed by the heavy air. This is the sound of the human body fighting for control in a moment of overwhelming expectation. The high-pitched, insistent drrrr of a single insect, perhaps a tireless cicada clinging to a piece of scrub, or a solitary fly drawn to the stench near the tomb, becomes disproportionately loud and piercing. It's mechanical, frantic buzzing is a jarring, insistent intrusion of mindless, cyclical life into the spiritual and emotional gravity of the human confrontation with death. This tiny sound is the only consistent external rhythm left in the clearing. Most intensely, the absolute silence forces an awareness of one's own internal rhythm. Every witness is now listening, consciously or unconsciously, to the dull thrum or drumming of blood in their own ears. This low, continuous sound, often called the heartbeat of silence, reminds every witness of their own fragile, pounding mortality and the ticking clock of their own existence. It is the sound of life asserting itself against the silent dominance of the tomb, a visceral, private acknowledgement of what they stand to lose. This chapter makes the listener acutely aware of the profound, fragile quiet. The stillness is so absolute that it feels like a physical entity, heavy and restrictive, wrapping around the assembled figures. Every eye is fixed on the master, who stands only feet from the dark opening, his figure defined by the intensity of his quiet confrontation with the vault. His silence is the final, ultimate key to the moment, gathering all the collective energy and expectation of the crowd. He appears to be engaged in an unseen communication, a moment of profound communion that precedes the action. The intensity of the quiet is terrifying precisely because it signals the end of waiting. Nothing is left but the command, the oppressive heat, the heavy stillness, the internal sounds of their own heartbeats, all combine to create a perfect chamber of expectation, where any sound, no matter how small, will be magnified into an event of massive significance. The air is so dry, so still, that it feels brittle, ready to crack under the mounting psychological pressure. The silence is a crucible, purifying the moment of all noise and distraction. The transition, when it comes, is not gradual, but instant and violent. The profound quiet is not slowly faded out, but shattered by the beginning of the command. A sudden, clear, singular sound that erupts into the oppressive silence. It begins with the simple, strong intake of breath, the sound of air being pulled into the lungs with deliberate, forceful intent, instantly signaling the end of the silent, shared vigil and the beginning of the great, impossible confrontation. The atmosphere snaps, and the moment of decision is irrevocably upon them. The profound silence that held the clearing captive is instantly and violently ripped apart by a single, powerful sound. The voice of the Master, delivering the impossible command. This chapter is entirely focused on the sound itself, an auditory event that vibrates with authority and conviction, cutting through the heavy heat and the deep stillness like a physical blade. The moment is defined by the three words that shatter the law of the tomb. Lazarus, come forth. First, consider the unique tone of the voice. It is not a shout born of desperation, nor a dramatic whisper filled with theatrical pretense. Instead, the tone possesses an absolute quality of authority, clear, commanding, and utterly devoid of any hint of doubt or supplication. It is the tone of one who speaks to an absolute reality, a statement of undeniable fact, rather than a hopeful request. It carries the full, uncompromising weight of certainty, delivered as if the outcome has already been settled in a realm beyond the visible, and the words are merely the necessary mechanism for its physical manifestation. The projection of the voice is formidable and focused. It is not loud in the sense of a sudden, shattering explosion, but possessed of an incredible clarity and carrying power. The voice is projected deliberately, aimed directly and centrally into the dark, sound-absorbing mouth of the tomb. It penetrates the heavy air, moving with a palpable force that seems to physically push the very heat and stillness aside. It is a voice designed not just for the human ears of the assembled witnesses, but for the ear of the dead, a sound meant to reach beyond the physical barrier of the stone, past the brittle linen wrappings, and into the spiritual domain of the departed soul. The two-part command is delivered with a brief, crucial pause. The name, Lazarus, is called with an intimate, unmistakable familiarity, a recognition that this is a private conversation being conducted in a public place. It establishes the personal connection and the subject of the command. The instruction that follows, "Come forth," is the raw, unadulterated statement of authority, carrying the power of creation itself. The words are crisp, perfectly articulated, and finalized with a downward inflection that brooks no debate. The resonance against the rocky hillside is immediate and distinct. The dry, unyielding limestone of the clearing does not allow the sound to dissipate easily. Instead, the voice strikes the rock face of the tomb and the nearby ledges, echoing briefly. A sharp, clear clap that momentarily multiplies the words, making the command seem to come from everywhere at once. The sound vibrating in the dry air around the listeners is a physical sensation that buzzes in their chests and ears. They feel the command as much as they hear it. The force of the words, a tangible, unnerving pressure that momentarily overrides the scent of decay. This sound is an active, physical force, a divine energy conveyed through human language. It is the word-made sound, a verbal intrusion into the natural, irreversible law of death and decay. The command does not merely request an action, it demands it, imposing a higher law onto the physical reality of the body. The very sound itself is the catalyst for the miracle, the powerful vibration that must reach past the burial shelf, past the brittle, spice-encrusted linen, past the 4-day corruption, touching the essence of the departed life. It is the audible crossing of an uncrossable boundary. The entire concentration of the crowd, the silence and the heat, was built entirely for this singular auditory event. The command rings out, briefly dominating the clearing, a sound that is too large, too powerful, and too audacious for the somber occasion. The reverberation fades quickly, absorbed by the silence and the rock, leaving behind an intense, charged stillness. The voice is gone, but the consequence of the command hangs suspended in the thick, dry air, demanding an answer. The chapter ends immediately after the words are spoken. The silence that returns is not the resigned, passive quiet of before, but a tense, profound, electric stillness. Every witness is frozen, breath held, eyes glued to the dark opening. They are waiting for the consequence. the impossible response that must follow the ultimate challenge to the law of the tomb. The air has been violently cleared, and now all that remains is the agonizing wait for the first, terrifying sound from the darkness. The silence that follows the potent, echoing command is not empty. It is a vacuum filled with the collective, suspended breath of the entire assembly. Every living ear is now trained with an impossible intensity on the dark, gaping square of the tomb entrance, waiting for an answer to the word spoken into the void. The tension is unbearable, stretching the moment of anticipation into an agonizing eternity, magnifying the importance of every passing second. Then, from the absolute, unyielding stillness of the rock-cut tomb comes the first, faint, unnatural noise. It is a tiny sound, so small it is almost missed, yet it is enough to stop the heart of every witness. It forces every person to instinctively lean forward, straining their hearing to confirm the impossible. It is a dry, papery scrape and shuffle, the sound of brittle linen windings moving against the cold, smooth stone of the burial shelf. This noise is profoundly unnatural, an auditory anomaly that should not exist in a place dedicated to permanent, final rest. The linen is old and stiffened by the spices, the cloth meant to remain motionless forever, holding the dead in a perfect, rigid composure. This initial sound is the first sign of a response, and it is a sound of material disturbance, not of breath or voice. It begins quietly, a whisper of dry friction against hard rock, utterly distinct from the ambient sounds of the outside world. It suggests not a sudden, dramatic rising, but a minute, agonizing shift in posture, a physical resistance to the stillness that has defined the last 4 days. It is the sound of an immense weight, bound and stiffened, beginning the process of movement. The dry, papery scrape is traced by the collective imagination of the crowd. They know, from the voice that spoke moments ago, exactly where the sound originates, deep within the coke, the narrow niche where the wrapped body was laid. The sound confirms that the body is not just responding to the command, but is physically beginning to move, to challenge the immovable boundaries of the burial shelf itself. This is not the passive movement of decomposition. This is resistance. The initial scrape is quickly followed by another, then a series of hesitant, slow scrapes and drags. The sound grows fractionally louder, becoming a slow, deliberate shuffle. It is the unmistakable sound of a heavy, resistant object being dragged across a cold, stone surface, its surface catching on the slightest imperfections left by the mason's tools. This is the sound of a struggle, of a wrapped, immobile form fighting its way out of the confines of its designated resting place. The sound is horrifying in its slow, measured progress. It indicates that the process is not instantaneous, but physical, requiring sustained effort and movement. The listeners imagine the heavy bound feet of the wrapped body, constrained by layers of brittle linen and dried spices, being slowly lifted and dragged along the narrow stone shelf. The sound continues to define itself. The continuous rasping of the cloth against the stone, the small thud of a limb being adjusted within its bandages, and the low, steady grrring of the wrappings against the rougher ceiling of the niche as the body attempts to sit up and turn. Every one of these small noises forces the witnesses closer to the entrance. Their initial physical revulsion at the smell, momentarily forgotten, entirely overcome by the terror and wonder of the sounds coming from within the darkness. The slow, unnatural shuffle finally leaves the confinement of the burial shelf. The sound is now a continuous, methodical scrape and drag, indicating the figure has managed to rotate and is moving out of the depths of the tomb and onto the main floor of the chamber. The sound is now louder, closer, echoing slightly off the chamber walls. The progression is chillingly clear. The shuffling noise has moved from the deep, hidden shelf to the open floor of the vault. The sound is approaching the mouth of the tomb, closer and closer to the dark square opening where the sunlit world waits. It is a slow, relentless, mechanical sound, the sound of the dead obeying the impossible command. The continuous mechanical scrape and drag of linen against stone, having moved across the main floor of the tomb chamber, now approaches the dark square opening. The sound grows louder, closer, echoing slightly with each shuffle, demanding the absolute attention of the silent, terrified crowd. Every eye is fixed on the black void, straining to pierce the darkness, to see the source of the impossible noise. The cold, mineral-rich air of the cave still streams out, carrying the faint, sweet, sick odor of the 4 days, yet the smell is now secondary to the sound. Suddenly, the scraping movement stops, positioned just within the mouth of the tomb. There is a brief, agonizing moment of silence, a pause that seems to suck all the air out of the clearing. Then, the silence is broken by the slight, unnatural shadow that appears to fill the black square. This is the moment of emergence, and the first sight of the figure is surreal, a terrible blend of the dead and the living. The form that slowly appears is wrapped completely in the shroud, the long, continuous strips of linen that bind the body from head to foot. It is a vertical mummy, an upright casing of stiff, dry cloth that seems to move only through the sheer, concentrated will of the word that summoned it. The head is covered by the main wrappings, entirely obscuring the features, creating a form without a face, a human shape reduced to the texture of cloth and the movement of mass. The smaller face cloth, the sudarium, is invisible beneath the bulk of the larger wrappings. The most shocking detail is the way the hands and feet are bound. The legs are likely wrapped together, allowing only for a stiff, shuffling movement. The hands are bound across the chest, or perhaps at the sides, entirely encased and immobile. This binding forces the figure to move in an awkward, tentative manner, not walking naturally, but inching forward in a series of stiff, jerky hops and slides. It is the movement of someone trapped within their own clothing, entirely constrained by the ritual of death. The figure is a living shadow against the blinding light of the afternoon sun. It stands perfectly framed in the black aperture, a dark, unsettling anomaly that defies the logic of light and space. The light catches the brittle, stiff texture of the outer linen, making it appear dry and papery. The wrappings are slightly stained and dust-covered from their recent movement on the cave floor. It is a sight that causes a low, collective gasp to ripple through the crowd, a sound instantly stifled by fear. The movement is incredibly difficult. The figure sways slightly as it attempts to find purchase, its center of gravity disrupted by the rigidity of the wrappings. The shuffling restarts, but now it is the sound of bound feet scraping on the stone lip of the tomb entrance. It is a slow, agonizing slide out of the darkness and into the sun. The process is excruciatingly gradual, lending an air of profound effort to the act of resurrection. It demonstrates that the command was not one of magic that instantly reconstituted the body in perfect form, but an order that required the physical form to exert itself from the condition of death. Finally, with one last jerky shuffle, the figure clears the threshold, stumbling onto the dry, sun-baked earth of the clearing. The move is sudden and awkward, the stiff wrappings unable to provide the necessary flexibility for a smooth landing. The figure is now fully visible, standing in the direct, harsh glare of the late afternoon light. The cloth-covered head tips back slightly, as if momentarily blinded by the intensity of the exposure. The crowd reacts instantly. The sight of the figure, a walking, bound corpse, is too much for the senses to process. The collective fear and amazement cause the entire assembly to surge backward slightly. A sudden, low sound of movement as feet scramble for distance, then stop again, held captive by the incredible sight. Martha and Mary emit a small, profound cry, not of grief, but of absolute, overwhelmed disbelief. The Master stands completely still, his eyes fixed on the figure that is now awkwardly poised between the shadow of the tomb and the sun of the living world. The figure of Lazarus, bound and rigid, has emerged, a walking contradiction that stands at the center of the clearing. He is silent, entirely encased in the finality of the linen. The silence that follows is thicker, deeper, and more charged than any silence before it, waiting for the command that will complete the return, the order to be free from the wrappings of the dead. The figure of Lazarus stands awkwardly in the sunlight, rigid and shrouded, a living monument to the power of the word that summoned him. The sight is simultaneously miraculous and disturbing, and the collective terror of the crowd prevents any forward movement. The Master, however, takes a deliberate final step closer, his eyes focused not on the miracle of life, but on the bondage of the linen. The command that follows is directed not to the dead, but to the living. Loose him and let him go. The focus shifts immediately to the physical act of unwrapping, a task that requires hands, effort, and the courage to approach the rigid, recently deceased form. Several men, galvanized by the double miracle of the command and the presence of the walking dead, hesitantly step forward. The task is delicate but necessary, a reversal of the ritual of death. The key sensory moment is the sound of the dry linen cloth being pulled and ripped. The linen strips, stiffened by the spices and the cold air of the tomb, are brittle and resistant. As the first binding around the feet is grasped and torn, the sound is a dry, sharp scratch and tear, a loud, rasping noise that cuts through the silence, entirely different from the muffled scrape of the cloth on rock. It is the sound of fabric that has served its purpose, now being violently undone. Each layer of binding that is pulled or ripped away falls to the dry earth with a soft thud and a scattering of dry, fragrant spice powder, the myrrh and aloes that had mingled with the scent of decay. The air momentarily fills with a renewed, concentrated burst of the sweet, pungent spice, a final olfactory signature of the tomb itself. The men work carefully, systematically peeling back the layers that had encased the legs, torso, and arms. The bindings around the hands and wrists are particularly difficult, requiring firm, decisive tearing to free the joints. As the wrappings fall away, the appearance of the skin is revealed. It is startlingly pale, entirely unused to the sun, having been shielded for 4 days in absolute darkness. The skin is shadowed and slightly cold, the color of wet plaster, and where the bindings were tightest, faint creases and depressions are visible. The arms, now released, hang tentative and stiff, unused to the simple movement of gravity. It is the skin of a body recently retrieved from the shadow, a vessel still adjusting to the light and the air. The removal of the bindings frees the body, allowing it to take on a more natural posture. The figure shudders as circulation and flexibility seem to return, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor running through the frame. The arms are raised tentatively, the fingers curling and uncurling against the bright sunlight, relearning the simple act of grasping. The ultimate moment of release comes with the removal of the face cloth, the sudarium, which is lifted and pulled away from the head. The features of Lazarus, his eyes, nose, and mouth, are exposed to the world for the first time in 4 days. His face is pale and deeply shadowed by the shock of the transition, but it is undeniably his. The first audible sound from Lazarus is not a word, but a physical reaction, a dry, hacking cough, followed by a profound, shuddering inhalation of fresh, warm air. It is the sound of lungs that have been entirely still, now violently reasserting their function, purging the cold, stale air of the tomb. The sound is raw, visceral, and utterly human, confirming to every witness that this is not a ghost or a spirit, but a restored, physical man. The physical act of breathing becomes steady, and the color begins to return slowly to the pale face. He blinks repeatedly against the sun, his eyes adjusting to the overwhelming light. The sound that follows the dry cough is the new, raw sound of his own unhindered voice. It begins as a low, murmuring sound, a simple, hesitant syllable of recognition or disorientation, before shaping itself into a full, resonant word, perhaps a name, perhaps a question. The sound of his living, breathing voice, restored from the grave, replaces the dry rasp of the linen, announcing the complete and undeniable triumph over the 4 days of finality. The noise and shock of the clearing have been left behind. The sun has set, painting the western sky in deep, residual hues of orange and fading rose. But the darkness has now claimed the narrow streets of Bethany. The quiet has returned, settling over the village, but it is a quiet fundamentally different from the stillness of grief that permeated the walls 4 days prior. The scene now shifts back to the small, familiar home, a dwelling built of rough-hewn stone and simple wood, where the family and their few close companions have gathered around the low, central table. This is the quiet, reflective evening hour, marked by the profound, fragile weight of their new reality, a reality they are only just beginning to grasp. The air in the house is warm, heavy with the domestic scent of wood smoke and old oil lamps, no longer burdened by the oppressive scent of mourning and myrrh, but carrying the simple, comforting aromas of a shared, ordinary meal. There is the earthy, slightly acidic fragrance of the dark local wine, the warm, yeasty smell of freshly baked bread torn into uneven pieces, and the subtle, salty aroma of fish cooked quickly over the evening coals. It is a simple meal, sparse by the standards of a wealthy city, but charged now with an almost unbelievable significance. Every bite of bread, every sip of wine, is a deliberate, conscious act of confirmation. Lazarus is here, he is hungry, and he is participating fully in the mundane, necessary ritual of human life. The focus is entirely on the physicality of consumption, the reassurance that life requires sustenance. The interactions between the two sisters, Martha and Mary, and their returned brother, Lazarus, are marked by an exquisite, subtle carefulness, a tentative exploration of the boundaries of the miracle. There is no loud rejoicing, no hysterical celebration that might fracture the fragile peace. Instead, there is quiet laughter, the sound soft and hesitant, as if testing the boundaries of their good fortune, making sure the sound itself is real. They speak in low, gentle tones, their voices soft, the words often dissolving into shared glances of disbelief and profound relief. They find they have little to say about the event itself, the experience being too large for human language. Martha moves with a quiet, continuous dedication, her movements no longer burdened by the tension of her grief and responsibility, but flowing with a grateful, focused attention on serving and tending. She places the platter of fish closer to Lazarus, a gesture of simple devotion. Every time her hand brushes his, the touch is lingered upon for a moment, an involuntary check that he is solid, warm, and entirely present. She is affirming her life through his restored existence, rebuilding her world around the sound of his steady chewing. Mary, now sitting closer to her brother than anyone else, often reaches out a hand to touch his arm or his sleeve. This is the hesitant touch, a need for continuous, physical confirmation. Her fingers trace the faint crease lines left by the linen bindings on his skin, the final, visible, faint marks of his terrifying journey into the grave and back. These touches are quiet, reflexive acts, driven by the lingering, irrational fear that the reality of his presence might dissolve, if not continually affirmed by the senses. The sight of his chest rising and falling is her constant, silent assurance. Lazarus himself is quiet, eating slowly, his body still visibly reacclimating to the demands of everyday life. He watches his sisters, a gentle, profound light in his eyes, the light of someone who has returned from a long, absolute darkness. His movements are slower than they once were, his voice still low and slightly hoarse, a lingering texture of the tomb in his throat. Yet, his presence fills the room entirely, solid and undeniable. He is a man who knows the geography of death intimately, now sitting comfortably in the center of the circle of the living, grounded by the simple necessity of eating. He is an anchor that has been pulled up from the deepest sea, now resting safely in the harbor. The atmosphere of the house has shifted completely from heavy grief to fragile, grateful normalcy. The terror of the tomb is now an external fact, a memory that colors the present but no longer defines it. The immediate aftermath of the miracle is defined by this attempt to be ordinary. The silence around the table is the comfortable, shared silence of family, where words are not always necessary, and shared breathing is enough. They are learning the shape of their new lives, discovering how to be ordinary again after encountering the absolute extraordinary. The silence is punctuated only by the occasional clinking of a ceramic cup being set down, or the soft thud of a piece of bread being placed on the rough wooden table. The sound of their hearts beating, once a terrifying reminder of mortality in the clearing, is now a comforting, synchronized rhythm. The chapter transitions as the meal concludes. The remnants of the food are cleared, and the single oil lamp's wick is trimmed, casting long, gentle shadows across the walls. The family prepares for the night, an act imbued with a profound difference in the quiet that settles over the house. There are no more professional mourners, no more weeping for the lost. The quiet is deep and steady, a silence of peace. The sleep of Lazarus and his sisters is no longer a desperate separation, defined by finality, but a shared, peaceful rest within the confines of their safe, warm home. The sound of their slow, even breathing, finally free from the constraints of fear, is the final, comforting rhythm of the night in Bethany, a domestic sound that rings with the weight of eternity. The final chapter provides a meditative reflection, moving away from the specific characters of Bethany to contemplate the quiet, eternal legacy of the event upon the landscape itself. The narrative lifts itself out of the small, warm house and casts its gaze over the small Judean village, now settled into the deep, profound quiet of the night. It is a quiet that holds within it the knowledge of both the shadow and the sunlight, the cold reality of the tomb, and the warm, recurring promise of life. We look back at the dark, cold tomb, situated a short distance away on the rocky hillside, visible now only as a deeper mass of black against the pale gray of the lunar light. The tomb's entrance is once again sealed, the heavy millstone rolled back into its groove, a symbol of the order that has been restored. It stands as a profound symbol of the shadow, the place of absolute stillness, coldness, and finality. It is the earthly address of death, and its presence defines the boundary between the living and the departed. But now, it is an empty shadow, a dark symbol that has been temporarily stripped of its power. Its coldness is only a memory, its stillness only a temporary state, forever marked by the brief passage of life through its center. The contemplation shifts immediately to the warm, eternal sunlight of the coming Judean morning. This is the sun that will rise again, exactly as it did yesterday and the day before, regardless of the darkness that preceded it. A symbol of continuous life, warmth, and the absolute promise of renewal. The air is cooling rapidly, preparing for the inevitable return of the heat. The contrast between the cold, unyielding rock of the tomb, the shadow, and the returning, enveloping light, the sunlight, encapsulates the profound truth revealed in the clearing, that the shadow is real. It exists, but it is not final. The light possesses the ultimate authority to command it away. The quiet legacy of the event on the small village is subtle but irreversible. Though the world outside may not yet fully understand, the people of Bethany now hold a profound, terrifying secret. Death is not the end. The physical, visceral memory of the dry scrape of linen, the sickening smell of corruption that defied human intervention, and the sound of the restored voice are now woven into the fabric of their daily existence. This knowledge is not loud or celebratory. It is a quiet, continuous certainty that alters the way they look at the earth, the sky, and the inevitable end of their own lives. Their mortality has been redefined. The air is entirely still, save for the movement of the nocturnal creatures of the desert. The final sensory detail is the sound of the wind sighing through the olive trees one last time before settling entirely for the night. It is a comforting, continuous sound, a soft, repetitive hush-hush through the silvery, delicate leaves of the ancient trees that dot the hillside. This sound is a reminder of the vast, indifferent, and cyclical rhythm of the natural world. A rhythm that remains unbroken, even by the disruption of death and resurrection. It is a gentle, peaceful sound that invites deep rest, a final, calming lullaby for the village that has witnessed the impossible. The wind carries the scent of the dry earth and the faint, distant scent of wild thyme, washing away the last psychic traces of fear and confusion. The script fades out entirely on this quiet, steady rhythm of the night in Bethany. The boundary between life and death, once a solid, unmoving stone that represented absolute separation, is now revealed to be thin, permeable, and peacefully bridged. The village sleeps, resting in the deep, encompassing silence that follows the impossible, knowing that the greatest struggle has already taken place, and the morning will bring only the warm, unceasing light, a perpetual confirmation of the life that was restored. The quiet is eternal, secured not by forgetting, but by the impossible memory.